Hi, welcome to today's webinar. I have noticed many myths and misinformation surrounding plant-based sports nutrition. And this is why I have actually created this webinar to address some of those myths. But more importantly, I want to discuss how you can learn to distinguish trustworthy information from the rest. But before we start, I'd like to give you some background on myself and my expertise in this area so you can, better understand where I am coming from and feel confident in the information that I'm about to share with you. I'm actually a qualified doctor and I was training to become a pediatrician, but I had to quit medicine for health reasons. And as an athlete who practices Kung Fu, I transitioned into fitness industry. But then I was actually lucky because I discovered a whole food plant-based diet. And when I transitioned, changed my diet to a whole food plant-based diet, I healed my chronic disease. And that, experience led me to pursue a master's degree in clinical and public health nutrition. As a nutritionist, I have chosen to register with the Association for Nutrition. This will help me actually to meet the standards of competence that is required by them. My main passion is sports nutrition, and I have created a module for a course at the University of Winchester. I have written a chapter on that topic for a clinical handbook, and I regularly, deliver talks and interviews on the subject. The world of nutrition is confusing and full of contradictory information. Eating is something all of us do every single day, and maybe that is the reason that most of us consider ourselves to be experts, to some degree. We have personal experiences, stories passed on from generations, and cultural traditions, and all of that shape our beliefs and theories about food. And the title of nutrition is not regulated. It's not regulated in the UK, and as far as I know, it's not regulated in the US either. So we end up with all these self-appointed specialists out there who share their opinion on social media. And if someone knows how to package that information quite well and they have a large following, others will believe them. And then we end up with plenty of misinformation or half-truths. Having said that, even qualified nutritionists and dietitians have their own personal beliefs about food and potential biases. For example, I follow a no-oil whole food plant-based diet for health reasons. But that doesn't make all oils bad, does it? In addition, nutrition is actually a new science, and there's still so much to discover about how different nutrients interact in our body. And nutrition is actually quite complex, and the research really faces numerous challenges, and at times it is difficult to draw definitive conclusions. So some of those limitations and obstacles, one of them is the impact of funding sources and possible conflicts of interest. There was a study in 2003 that discovered that funding sources can actually affect research outcomes in medicine and biomedical sciences like nutrition. Then ethical concerns. There are certain studies that we simply cannot conduct because it wouldn't be ethical. For example, researchers cannot starve individuals. We cannot withhold essential nutrients, or we cannot deny a drug that we know it works. Financial and time restrictions make it hard to conduct long-term investigations. There are challenges in recruiting and retaining study participants. Some individuals who may be actually ideal, subjects, they may be unable or unwilling to participate, and others may just leave the study midway. Some may not be compliant because the diet that they have been assigned to is hard, and all of that results in a smaller sample size. Guaranteeing the accuracy and consistency of data. Nutrition researchers often rely on self-reported data, and that's not always accurate. I mean, how many of us remember exactly what we ate last week? And even if you remember, for example, what you ate this morning, when it comes to portion sizes, we have different definitions, and we just sometimes forget certain things, and we are just not accurate. Then confounding factors like genetics and environment. It is not always possible to control confounding factors, and we can't generalize findings from a specific population to a broader one. In fact, it is really hard to control every variable, in a person's diet and lifestyle. There are also differences in how individuals react to food and nutrients. I mean, the most effective research would be residential studies where participants actually live in a controlled environment and researchers can monitor their diets and their activities. But even so, each person has a unique health history, and the researchers, even though they look for subjects who have a similar kind of background history, similar characteristics, there are still a few things that researchers cannot account for entirely. And another limitation is actually lack of uniformity and consistency when it comes to the methods and tools that researchers use, to assess and quantify the food and nutrient consumption of individuals. So difficulty in measuring dietary intake. I already mentioned that most data actually from questionnaires or food diaries is self-reported and can be inaccurate. Then randomized control trials are the gold standard for research, but they aren't always feasible in nutrition research, due to ethical considerations, but also sometimes it's just so difficult to, randomly assign people to diets because we see what we are eating, so it's just not possible. And then lastly, industry influence. That's actually a biggie because the sports nutrition industry is highly commercialized. We have the many industries that actually have a vested interest in kind of studies because they want to promote a specific product, or if they want to promote a specific viewpoint. And by convincing you of one viewpoint, of one kind of belief system, you would end up buying their product. So that is quite a big one. So before moving on, I want to briefly touch on personal bias in research. This can be quite a significant issue for both researchers and those who interpret the data. I mean, we all have our own beliefs and values when it comes to food and nutrition, and sometimes because of that, we may actually favor one study which supports our viewpoints. For example, as a vegan, sometimes it is. I believe it is crucial that we acknowledge that if you are vegan, obviously you would be biased. But then so are those who are not vegan. They would be biased and prefer the studies which kind of say, a vegan diet can be detrimental. So my point is we need to just acknowledge it. And by acknowledging it rather than denying the existence of personal bias, we can actually remain open-minded and always just consider, okay, is that my personal bias or is the study really saying this? So I think just being aware of it helps. Now, we spoke about, personal beliefs, but sometimes our personal beliefs are actually based on our experiences, especially as an athlete. Anecdotal evidence is quite useful, but we shouldn't actually rush to draw conclusions from, personal experiences. Remember, correlation is not causation. Now, correlation refers to a relationship between two variables. When one variable changes, so does the other. Causation refers to a situation where one variable directly actually causes a change in the other variable. For example, we have this example, which is a funny one, but it shows what I mean. You see, when people consume more margarine, their divorce rate goes up. But obviously, consuming margarine isn't the reason that people are getting a divorce. So there is a correlation, but not a causation. So let's say I have been following a low-fat diet to lose weight, and then I hit a plateau. And I hear about a new diet, a new drug, and I decide to give it a try. And suddenly I start losing weight again. So I will probably attribute my weight loss to this new intervention, whatever it was. Although it could have been just a coincidence. Let me give you another example. Let's say I feel my training has declined. I cannot lift as heavy as I used to. Then I hear of a new supplement or diet and I try it and see improvements. Then I will, of course, believe that this new whatever it was is the key to my success. But again, there could have been so many other factors at play. Maybe I was overtrained before, or maybe it was lack of sleep that actually caused the decline in my performance. And, as athletes, we can have bad days, and we just don't understand it. We don't know why. I know I have those bad days when I'm just not as flexible as I usually am, or I cannot kick high enough. So we can have these bad days and then, suddenly we get better. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm actually inviting you to always think critically, whether you are reading a scientific paper or even when you are analyzing your own experience, and try to look for a causal link or a mechanism that could actually explain it. Okay, so let's examine some common myths. Ketogenic diets enhance athletic performance. True or false? Ketogenic diets are high-fat, low-carbohydrate diets where people try to get a high proportion of their calories from fat, and they try to keep their carbohydrate intake less than 50 grams per day. Now, ketogenic diets are actually meant to induce ketosis, which is a metabolic condition where the body is actually burning fat for fuel instead of carbohydrates. And obviously, we have more fat than glycogen. Glycogen, is the stored carbohydrates in our body. And even the leanest athlete will have more fat than glycogen. So by using fat as fuel, athletes can actually spare their glycogen stores during exercise, and this way they can perform better. And they wouldn't need to worry about, carbohydrate loading, for example, before exercise, or, taking carbohydrates during exercise. And this way, the idea is that they would prevent debunking, the hitting the wall phenomenon. So that is the theory, that, a ketogenic diet would increase fat oxidation, reduce reliance on carbohydrates as fuel, improve metabolic flexibility, and sustain athletic performance for longer. So let's see what the evidence says. The first study that I want to discuss is a randomized crossover trial in 2006. And they studied the effects of high-fat diets on endurance training in 8 cyclists. They consumed a high-fat diet where they got 68% of their calories from fat, and a high-carb diet where they got 68% of the calories from carbs, and they had a 2-week washout period. On day 7, they carb loaded, and the researchers asked the participants to perform various exercises on different days, and they also did a 100-kilometer time trial with sprints at specific distances. So 100-kilometer time trials are when you run or cycle against the clock, basically. And the results showed that low-carb diets improved fat oxidation, but actually didn't affect the 100-kilometer time trial performance. So after the high-fat diet, the sprint power output was lower. So the conclusion was that high-fat diets may actually compromise high-intensity exercise, while high-carb diets actually maintain the pace better. This was obviously a small study. The muscle glycogen stores were not measured after the carb loading, and the cyclists knew which diet they were consuming. The next study is from 2014. The researchers investigated the effects of a low-carb ketogenic diet on aerobic performance. They recruited 8 cyclists who had at least 5 years of training experience. And they were assigned to either a mixed diet or a low-carb diet for the first month, and then they switched diets for the second month. The low-carb diet was having 15% of the calories from carbs, 70% from fat, and 15% from protein. The researchers measured the oxygen uptake, body mass, body composition, and also lipid profiles. And the conclusion was that a ketogenic diet may actually improve fat oxidation because it increases the availability of free fatty acids. So it enhances endurance performance in long distance events. And the ketogenic diet can also reduce post-exercise muscle damage, and it improves the VO2 max, but only at sub-maximal workloads. However, peak power was reduced after high-fat diets. Again, this was actually a smaller study, just 8 participants, and only it was 4 weeks, so longer than the previous study, which was just 1 week. It is still short, and there was no carb loading after, before they performed the exercises, so this to see if there was any potential differences. This next study is from 2017. It is a study performed by a research group led by Dr. Berg. In my opinion, she's one of the greatest sports dietitians of our time. She has, performed tons of studies. She has written lots of, academic papers. She's an expert. Anyway, so the study. The researchers compared the effects of 3 different diets on elite race walkers. For those of you who don't know what race walking is, it is a form of long distance event where the participants have to have like 1 foot on the ground at all times. They recruited 21 male athletes, and the athletes actually stayed in athletes' residences, so the meals and the activity was supervised. All groups had the same energy and protein intake, but one group actually consumed a high carb diet, the other one a low carb, high fat diet, and the third group had a periodized carb diet. A periodized carb diet is a diet where the intake is adjusted to training. So if you are doing high intensity training, you are consuming more carbohydrate, and on days when you have like low intensity training or you're not training at all, you consume less carbohydrate. And researchers also monitored their blood ketone levels to see how long it would take for the athletes to become fat adapted. And it happened within 3 to 6 days, which is something other studies have also confirmed. Now, the low, the kind of low carb, high fat diet, they improve the fat oxidation during exercise, but they also increase oxygen consumption. So fat actually produces more ATP per gram than carbohydrates, but actually it produces less ATP per unit of oxygen consumed. Basically, what it means is that you need more oxygen on high fat diets. And the low carb diet, so the high fat low carb diet group was about 2 to 3% slower, and these results were actually statistically significant. In summary, high fat diets improve fat oxidation, and the body utilizes fat as fuel, and that happens typically within less than a week. And this helps actually with running longer distances. But when you're fat adapted, you don't actually have the capability to burn carbohydrates. So it reduces your ability to break down muscle glycogen and use it aerobically. So obviously your performance is going to be affected. So you won't be able to exercise at faster speeds, or when you're running or cycling uphill. So that metabolic flexibility that in theory should have been improved is not going to be improved. So keto diets in general are good for moderate intensity training, but not for high intensity exercise. So it really depends on what your goal is. If you want to be faster and be better than previously, then I wouldn't recommend ketogenic diets. Plant proteins are inferior to animal proteins when it comes to muscle gain. True or false? Part of me thinks that by now everybody has seen all these amazing vegan bodybuilders who, are building muscles on protein and plant proteins, and they are winning competitions. But then I meet people, even, dietitians and nutritionists, who still believe that you need animal-based protein if you want to build muscles. Now, the main issue with plant proteins is that the amino acid profile is different to animal-based protein. So there are 9 essential amino acids that must be obtained through diet, and both animal and plant proteins contain all those essential amino acids. However, plant proteins can be lower in 1 or 2 essential amino acids. This is referred to as the limiting amino acid, and this has created the myth that plant proteins are incomplete and inferior to animal-based proteins. And there are a couple of reasons why this myth has actually perpetuated. One reason is industry influence. On the one hand, we have the meat and dairy industries, and they're really interested in promoting their products. They want their products, which is like kind of animal-based protein. They want to say that those products are essential and superior. On the other hand, we have the fitness industry, and they also want to sell, their supplements. So because of that, the myth has been perpetuated. And another reason used to be lack of research, but that has changed now. So I'm going to look at some of those papers. Now, obviously, there are many studies that show the benefits of plant-based diets on health. I have chosen these three studies. They look specifically at plant proteins. In a review from 2020, researchers examined the nutritional quality of plant-based proteins and their effects on health and physical function. And they found that plant-based proteins can provide a complete amino acid profile, and they promote muscle health, bone health, and overall well-being. Then a review in 2014, they actually explored the health benefits of a vegan diet and its relationship to gut microbiota. And the conclusion was that plant proteins, as part of a high-fiber, low-fat diet, can actually positively affect gut microbiota composition. It reduces, inflammation. It improves insulin sensitivity, and it reduces the risk of chronic diseases. And the authors actually added that plant proteins are just as good, if not better, than animal-based proteins. Now, the last review, the last paper, which is one of my favorites, actually, it is from 1994, so 30 years ago. And it was written by two nutritionists. They are professors at some universities in the US. I don't remember the name. And so 30 years ago, they already debunked several myths, about plant proteins. By the way, they are not vegan, those nutritionists. And, they talked about the incomplete amino acid profile and the lower quality of plant proteins. And they discussed it and debunked those myths. And they also emphasized the importance of actually consuming different plant protein sources throughout the day, not in the same meal. And 30 years later, those myths still continue and persist. And I just think it's about educating ourselves and educating others so that we can stop these myths. Now, I want to discuss three more papers which look at plant proteins and muscle building. The first study is a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial. The researchers recruited 161 men, and they were people who were actually exercising moderately, but their training, their workout routine wasn't actually aimed at increasing muscle strength. So the researchers wanted to compare the effects of pea protein, whey protein, and placebo on muscle thickness. The participants underwent 12 weeks of upper limb resistance training. All of them took, a protein shake every day. They took 2 protein shakes, each time 25 grams of protein. And obviously, one group had the placebo. And after 12 weeks, the results showed that, the pea and whey protein group, they had similar muscle gains. And of course, that suggests that plant proteins are just as effective, as animal-based protein in supporting muscle growth. Now, there are a few significant limitations with this study, at least in my opinion. Well, first of all, there is no clear dietary information. So we know what supplement they were taking, but we don't know what else they were eating throughout the day. And also, more importantly, well, not more importantly, as important as the dietary information, is that the research, this study was actually funded by a company that sells pea protein powders. So obviously, their focus was on seeing if their product is as effective as animal-based protein. So they didn't focus on whole food sources. So in my opinion, although it would actually favor, vegan diets, I don't consider this as a good study. So this next study, it is a systematic review and meta-analysis. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis look at the selection of studies and they analyze their data. This one is from 2021, and the researchers actually looked at 18 studies. They compared the effects of animal and plant proteins on muscle mass and strength. The results showed that animal proteins had a slightly positive effect on muscle mass, but it wasn't statistically significant. And animal proteins also led to a small increase in the percentage of muscle mass, and that was statistically significant. In terms of muscle strength, there was no significant difference between animal and plant protein. Now, muscle mass refers to the actual amount or weight of muscle tissue in the body. Percentage of muscle mass, on the other hand, is the proportion of the body's total weight that is made up of muscle tissue. Both are important measurements. But if your goal is to, is muscle gain, then muscle mass is actually more important because it represents the amount of muscle tissue in the body. So increasing muscle mass leads to muscle gain. Now, the results and outcomes actually changed when certain studies were removed from the analysis. So when it came to muscle strength, the results remained the same even when certain studies were removed. But when it came to muscle mass, if certain studies were removed, they got different results. There are usually quite a few limitations with systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Which studies have been kind of included, what are the characteristics of the populations in each study. With this study, the studies had actually different populations, even different age groups, and they also had different resistance training. And also when it came to protein sources, the animal-based protein was mainly from dairy, and the plant protein source was from soy. And the authors admitted that they didn't have any dietary background on some of the populations in some of the studies, and they just assumed that everybody was was consuming high protein diet. So I think there were quite a few limitations with this study. So yeah. But the next study, that is actually one of my favorites, and I think this study, which is again quite a recent one from 2021, this study really answered the protein question when it comes to resistance training, to muscle building on plant-based diets. The researchers recruited 38 men, 19 were non-vegan, 19 were vegan. And the vegans had been vegan actually for at least 4 years. So they weren't people who just changed their diet for the study or for the duration of the study, or they had just transitioned to a vegan diet recently. So they had been vegan for a while, and they all had similar kind of characteristics, similar heights, similar amounts of lean mass, fat mass, and strength. The researchers supplemented their participants because they wanted to make sure that both groups received at least 1.66 grams of protein per kg body weight per day. So the non-vegans were supplemented with whey protein, and vegans were receiving soy protein supplements. They underwent 12 weeks of resistance training, which focused on the muscles of the lower limbs. And after 12 weeks, both groups had improved muscle mass, size, and strength, and there wasn't any difference between both groups. And I think this study clearly showed that if you consume adequate amount of protein and undergo appropriate training, you can build muscle on a vegan diet, and it's just as good as an omnivorous diet. But of course, the training is important. We often forget that it's not just about how much protein you get and where you get your protein from. It's not just about the nutrition. It is important, but you also need to actually undergo this the right amount of training and exercises. So that's also important. And one fun factor is that I heard the lead researcher, who is not a vegan, he said that after this study, he has actually started consuming more plant protein. So let's talk about BCAA supplements. Do vegan athletes actually require BCAA supplements to meet their losing needs for muscle growth? Well, I think the last study that I just discussed really spilled the beans, didn't it? I mean, it showed us that, just by having adequate amount of protein, you can build muscle and plant proteins, and that one was without BCAA supplements. But let's have a look at it anyway. BCAA, branch chain amino acids, they are valine, leucine, and isoleucine. And these are essential amino acids, so we need to get them from our diet. And as I already mentioned, all plant foods contain all the essential amino acids, but the amount can vary, and the leucine content can be low in some plant protein sources. Leucine plays a crucial role in protein synthesis and muscle growth, so it is important for those of people who want to build muscle, but also to people who want to prevent muscle loss. And especially as we age, our muscles can deteriorate, And there's a condition called sarcopenia that, as we age, we may get. So losing helps to preserve muscle mass, especially in older people. And it's also involved in wound healing. Now, most people, when they think of BCAA supplements, they're actually thinking, BCAA for muscle gain. But the results are, the results of studies are quite mixed. Interestingly enough, though, there are more studies, or let's say there is more evidence for BCAA supplements in reducing muscle soreness. So the first study examined BCAA supplements in 30 untrained men and women. They were randomly divided into two groups. One group was given 5 grams of BCAA supplement, the other one was given placebo. And they did 7 sets of 20 squats. It was a crossover design, so after 12 weeks, the groups switched. There were men and women in both groups, and the women reported that actually after taking the BCAA supplement, there was, the muscle soreness was lower. The men didn't report any benefits, but it was just a subjective report that the soreness was lower. Now, this next study from 2010 also examined the impact of BCAA supplementation on muscle soreness, but also on muscle function and damage markers after intense exercise. They recruited 24 men, and they were divided into 2 groups. One received BCAA, the other placebo. They did 12 sets of 10 repetitions of knee extension exercises. And again, the results showed that they reported reduced kind of muscle soreness after taking the BCAA supplement. Yes. But again, it was a subjective report. The BCAA supplements didn't actually improve muscle function or damage markers. This last review is quite recent, from 2017, and it actually discusses the role of BCAA in muscle protein synthesis. And the author argues that muscle protein synthesis requires all essential amino acids. And, BCAA alone will not create an anabolic state, and it may even reduce muscle protein synthesis. So there are actually a few studies on humans. I'm talking on studies which have been, performed on humans. There are animal studies, but we don't discuss that. So on humans, when it comes to BCAA supplements, there are studies which suggest that actually muscle protein synthesis could be reduced. So based on current evidence, it is safe to say that BCAA supplements may reduce muscle soreness, but, I would say so does a diet high in antioxidants. Additionally, the evidence suggests that as long as you're actually consuming, adequate amount of protein, BCAA consumption will not, result in increased muscle growth. And the American College of Sports Medicine does not recommend BCAA supplement to the general public. And as for professional athletes, most nutritionists and dietitians that I have spoken to, they don't recommend it. So I guess, it is really up to you. Sports drinks, are they essential for hydration, or are you better off, drinking plain water? Well, like many things in sports nutrition, the answer is it depends. Athletes lose, water and electrolytes through sweat during exercise, and if they don't replenish those, they may actually become dehydrated, and that can negatively affect their performance and health. So, when you are dehydrated, it leads to a decrease in blood volume. It means your heart has actually to work harder to circulate blood to body's organs and muscles. And as a result, you will feel fatigued, your endurance declines, you can't focus. So you do need to drink water, or you drink, let's say, just drink to make sure that you stay hydrated. So how can you make sure that you can stay hydrated? Firstly, your hydration actually starts before your event. So you need to start your event in a well-hydrated state. So usually 1 or 2 days beforehand, you need to think of your hydration. If you're well hydrated and the event is less than 1 hour, you'll be okay with water. With water. If your race is longer, so more than an hour, then you will lose electrolytes, and or let's put it that way, the amount of electrolytes that you lose, you need to replace those lost electrolytes. The amount of sodium that an athlete needs, it can really vary on, depending on a number of factors. For example, what is the duration and intensity of the exercise? How much does the athlete actually sweat? Because we don't all sweat the same, amount to the same degree. The American College of Sports Medicine recommends drinking about 5 to 7 ml of water, ml per kg of water at least 4 hours before exercise, then another 3 to 5 ml per kg 2 hours before exercise. And during exercise, you continue drinking 150 to 350 ml every 15 to 20 minutes. But that again, depends on your body weight and sweat rate. And according to the American College of Sports Medicine, sports drinks should contain 80 to 160 milligram of sodium per 227 ml of serving. So just to give you an idea, a quarter teaspoon has about 550 to 600 milligram of sodium. So just to give you an idea how much sodium you need. But bear in mind, if you're actually working out more than an hour, you'll also need to replenish your glycogen stores. So how much carbohydrate or sodium you need depends on your activity. When it comes to carbohydrates, if you're exercising less than an hour, you need up to 30 gram carbohydrate. If you are working out 1 to 2.5 hours, you need up to 60 gram of carbohydrates. And if your training is more than 2.5 hours, you need actually to have 60 gram of carbohydrates every hour. And of course, you can make your own, sports drink based on your needs. The reason I didn't actually discuss specific kind of individual studies looking at sports drinks is because each sports drink has a different composition, and so you need to read each sport drink. It's not like kind of I can say sport drinks are good or bad because each sport drink is different, and you need to read the label and see what is inside that bottle and does it actually meet your requirements. And also bear in mind, if you don't need the sport drinks, you might be, they can be quite high in sugar and high in calories, so that is also something you need to kind of have a look and assess if you need it or if you want to take that. But as I said, you can make your own sport drinks based on your needs. And all you need is really water, salt, and sugar. The ideal ratio of glucose and sodium depends, again, on the intensity and duration of the exercise and, how much you sweat and how much you tolerate fluid. Not everybody actually tolerates fluid while they are exercising. So you need to kind of experiment and find out how much you can drink without being sick, basically. A commonly recommended ratio for a sports drink is 6 to 8% of carbohydrate and a sodium concentration of 20 to 30 millimole per liter. So just to give you an idea, if you want to get 6% carbohydrate in 1 liter water, you can either add 60 gram sugar, or you can have 3 tablespoons maple syrup, or 3 tablespoons of agave if you like that. Then you want to add a quarter teaspoon of table salt to get 25 millimole of sodium in 1 liter. And of course, I always tell athletes they should actually have iodized salt. This way you also get your iodine. Now to summarize, you need to stay hydrated. And not just during your event, you need to actually start beforehand. And you need to assess how much you sweat and how much fluid your stomach can tolerate on non-event days so that you can come up with a plan which is individualized for you. All right, we have come to the end of the presentation. As you can probably tell, the world of sports nutrition, particularly plant-based sports nutrition, is filled with myths and misconceptions. And I chose these topics because I wanted to show you that sometimes you need actually to read many research papers and find out the conclusion, find out what is the truth. But other times you actually just need to understand the underlying physiology, and that helps you to make an informed decision. So I really hope that this webinar has inspired you to think critically and provided you with the tools to make informed decisions. All right. I have received one question, which is about intermittent fasting for athletes. Well, there isn't enough studies actually looking at intermittent fasting for athletes, or let's say, and the studies, the evidence we have is inconclusive. Obviously, there are benefits to intermittent fasting, the same benefits that the general public may benefit from. But we need to look at it this way. When athletes, when I was talking about the ketogenic diet, I touched on the topic of the importance of carbohydrates, of glycogen, of glucose in your body. So intermittent fasting, when you are not eating anything for a longer period, and if you're exercising, and you don't have enough glucose for your body, you need to replenish those glycogen stores. So I mean, there are dietitians who actually say, sports dietitians, quite well-known sport dietitians, who believe that athletes should be eating something, having like a snack every 3 to 4 hours. And there is a sports dietitian, Dan Bernardo, again, like an expert like Dr. Liz Berg, who says that even in the evening, at night, before they go to bed, they should have a small snack, because you want to make sure that your glycogen stores are not replenished, because if that is the case, your body would burn your body would need, let's say, other fuel, and it could utilize protein, and you want to prevent that. Having said that, I think there isn't one answer, because it really depends on what your exercise level is. I mean, are you doing just 1 hour every day? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you like an athlete, training 3-4 hours a day, or maybe 6 to 8 hours every day? So yeah, there isn't one answer. So it is, I would actually approach it like an individual basis, like what are you doing, and then decide. I have actually worked with actually 3 people, but then one of them was I would say an amateur athlete. The other one just working out kind of regularly, like kind of doing maybe an hour every day, maybe 5 times a week. So I would call that like an hobby exerciser. So I think you would approach it differently as a hobby exerciser than as an amateur athlete, as a professional athlete who kind of who takes part in competitions, basically. So that is different. So yes, I think you need to approach it individually, if it is the right thing for you. If any other questions, by all means, just email me or comment below, and I'll get. Thank you. Bye.